I'm Elizabeth Macdonald, and it's time for another We're Not Done Yet conversation. I'm delighted to welcome Wayne Hilliker, retired United Church minister. Wayne, I understand that even though you're not preaching every Sunday anymore, you're not done yet with theology. So let's go back to before the beginning when you were ordained in 1966. Who influenced or what influenced your call to ministry?
I was brought up in a normal United Church family, and I didn't do much, up into high school. I didn't do much thinking about connecting what I believed with my life or my goals in life or anything. I just, so kind of was a typical teenager, I guess. We were more concerned with what's happening each day and what we looked like. we went through the usual teenage stuff. But I ended up attending a Youth for Christ rally in Montreal, and attended it on Saturday night, about 400 young people from all across the island. And the speakers there were all primarily geared to getting you to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And so there was a kind of message of fear that kept on coming. And if you didn't, the implication was that you'd be going to hell. And so that eventually, with some pressure on some peers, I went forward. I can't remember what I did, what I said, but after I came home, I realized I was so totally confused. I realized that this wasn't a decision I freely made, but was one out of fear. And it affected me so much that I really considered pondering whether I wanted to live. It had such an effect on me. If this is what Christianity was about, that you had to leave a track in a washroom that you went to if you're on vacation, everything, like no dancing after 12 o'clock on Saturday night, things like that. And fear, but of course, ending your life's no solution, because that's not permitted either. So I was in this state of mind, and kind of really in turmoil. It caused me to fail a grade. In senior matric in Quebec, you could go to high school after grade 11, but I went to grade 12, and I was so troubled. Anyway, somehow I got involved in the YPU, the Young People's Union of the United Church, and they had a conference every 2 years. And I went to that and discovered young people that were interested in the world, interested in social justice issues, that were followers of Jesus out of love, not out of fear. And we had speakers like Tommy Douglas challenging us to make a difference in the world. And over the next year or so, I pondered all of this and realized I had discovered too, at that meeting, an understanding of the nature of God that was based on God's unearned friendliness of God. So the grace of God, that God accepts us as we are, and it's in gratitude to that gift. And I wanted to share that grace with others. That's the only thing. And that remains central in all of my preaching ministry, all of my congregational ministry. And so
So that shift from a theology of fear to a theology of grace made a huge difference, not just in your call to ministry, but in your life. When did you become aware of theology itself? I suspect that as the theology was having an impact on you initially, that wasn't the first thing that would come to mind. Oh, there's a theology at work here. How did you begin to identify theology?
Well, I guess because I'm fundamentally a kind of restless believer, I have always had lots of questions and doubts, and it's a mystery why some people find it easy to have faith and some people find it much more difficult. I have no answer to, I don't know why that is, but I'm a questioner. I'm a sort of a wintry spirituality person. And so I had a hunger for reading material even before I entered, and in my early years, arts course, uh, I came across a book that was very pivotal, Beyond Fundamentalism by Daniel Stevick. And it helped me see um, that there's a different understanding one can have of the Bible, that the Bible seeks to open a discussion, not to close one, and that I was okay with my questions and doubts. And that was very, very freeing for me. And I read, I'm a reader, and so I read The Christian Agnostic by Leslie D. Weatherhead, and that spoke to me.
So
To be
your own hunger led you into exploring different kinds of theologies. I'm wondering about the impact of where you engaged in ministry, because more than most of us, you served a very diverse range of congregations. You served Indigenous congregations, rural congregations, a downtown big city congregation, an affluent suburban congregation. Then finally, here in Kingston, called to Chalmers United Church on the edge of Queen's University with lots of ties to Queen's Theological College. Very different contexts for preaching and for sharing theology. What impact did the congregation have, the kind of congregation that you were serving? How did that affect your exploration of theology and your sharing of it?
Hmm. I guess it affected me in the way that I'd always felt that it was important to hear other viewpoints. And so, well, I'm thinking of trying to capture this as you'll probably discover, those that know me, I love quotes. Someone has said that there are two kinds of preachers, the bees and the spiders. Uh, the spiders draw upon their own experiences, especially preachers. And I've found very often female preachers do that more so than male. I don't think it's in the genes, but for some reason, that's my experience. But bees are those that gather they need the creativity of others. They gather their nurture from other people. And that's sort of me. I'm very much a bee. And so I remember Barbara Brown Taylor saying, it's not so much that skilled preachers make strong congregations, it's that engaged congregations make great preachers. And so in my ministry, I didn't know that quote at the beginning, but I realized that if I was saying something significant that spoke to people's hopes or fears or questions, because I think that our pews are full of people who no longer find a satisfying, authentic faith for themselves by just listening to traditional doctrinal interpretations. And so I wanted to know when I discovered some feedback from some kind of sermon, then that fueled me to be more motivated again to try and find out what am I scratching where people are itching. And I think the preacher needs to hear what he or she is saying as much as the listener. So it's not that I've got it all together, but by engaging, whether it was with Native people or whether it was with rural people, suburban, inner city, or here in Kingston, that interaction really fed me. And so, and forced me to say, okay, theologically, how do I express and raise questions about the nature and authority of the Bible? And how does that strike people? One thing I learned too is that never be fair if you're describing another viewpoint.
Mm.
Don't describe it in a way that is not true. I remember Bill Coffin's, I went to a thing on preaching on controversial issues, a workshop with him, and he was telling and reminding us that at Riverside Church in New York City, this was in the 1970s, he had gay people on his board of deacons. And so there was this Fosdick convocation on preaching, about 400 clergy. And they were saying, how do you get away, Bill, with talking about all these controversial issues? And so he said to them, okay, hands up all those who've read one book on homosexuality. 3 people.
Out of 400.
And his response was, you don't preach on this because you don't know what the hell to say.
Mm.
And it taught me that you have to do your homework, no matter, because in some congregations, there's someone that knows more about whatever you're saying than anyone else.
So for you, over the years, theology has been relational, and it has also been developing. It's not something static. And I've heard you talk about embedded theology as something that each one of us carries with us. What exactly do you mean, Wayne, when you use that term embedded theology?
Yeah, this is in theological seminaries, they often talk to students in contemporary theological colleges today about that. Embedded theology would mean that all of us have that. We may not realize it, we may not be able to articulate it, but it's what things that have influenced our beliefs, especially our religious beliefs, either by our parents, a teacher, something we've read, some experience we've had. And that's adequate for a lot of people. But many people, and I think this would be true for retired clergy or lay or ordained or whatever people, they find that they've had something happens to them or something they've read and so on, and they no longer find that embedded theology accurate for them anymore. And so they deliberately try to find a more satisfying, intellectually authentic faith for themselves that makes sense.
So what's happened to your embedded theology? How have you handled that kind of situation you just described?
Well, my deliberate theology continually is deliberate. It continually is moving. I've changed in my understanding of the nature and authority of the Bible. That I've changed in my understanding of Jesus. Robin Meyer's book, Saving Jesus from the Church, How to Stop Worshiping Christ and Start Following Jesus, really spoke to me about, he speaks of where we as preachers are guilty so often of what he calls airport theology, where you reduce the significance of Jesus to an arrival and a departure as if nothing was important in between. And yet it's the teachings and the parables of Jesus that contain the heart really of the gospel for me. I remember Bob Bader that I worked with one time in Toronto at Eglinton United Church. He said, if you only had one parable, you'd have the gospel. That starts you thinking. So I think there are a lot of people who have abandoned their embedded theology, but haven't quite developed a faith that they can own with authenticity, and that they don't have to leave their brains at the door of any faith community, but they're there, and or they've left now. The nuns who are saying they have no connection and they don't really identify with any kind of religious faith or even spirituality. It's interesting what's happening in our world. So the challenge today for me, and really has always been to able to address those people who are struggling to and yearning for a more intellectually satisfying faith. I'm not knocking, I remember Fred Craddock saying that the most powerful kind of address or sermon, if you will, is that which speaks to the mind, the heart, and the will. Thinking, feeling, and doing. What is it? What is its value? What do I do about it? And that's why I've always found in worship that the end of the service, no matter how you've experienced the worship hour, to go out with a phrase I first heard commissioning by Marcus Borg, and that is that life is short and we do not have too much time to gladden the hearts and the minds of those who travel the way with us. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind and just. So that at the end of worship, you go out with a direction of the kind of discipleship that you should have, hopefully you were strengthened in that worship hour to do.
Wayne, this conversation is far from over. So I'm just going to ask you one more question for this particular moment. As you think of all of what you've shared with us, I wonder if you could sum up in maybe just a sentence or two. Why is it important for us retired ministers not to be done yet with theology? What's at stake here?
Oh boy, that's a good question. What's at stake? Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is, and I congratulate you, Elizabeth, for doing these kinds of interviews, because there is that, the Aboriginal people have this, the wisdom of the elders is pretty important for them. I don't think the institutional church really recognizes that very much anymore. That surely there's some wisdom in those who've had a reasonably good track record within the life of the institutional church, and those who have been ordained and preached and have taught and visited and conducted funerals and that kind of all the different aspects of pastoral ministry. Surely we've learned many things that can help younger clergy, and so I just think it's those of us who are retired. Well, the Alban Institute in some of their studies have said the best kind of retirement is not doing the same thing and less of it, but doing something different with your background and drawing upon it. But I'm trying to do some writing or trying to share articles with other colleagues in ministry, some retired, some not retired, so that because I'm able to discern now, after all these years, of 40 years, the things that I think speak to people. There's opportunity for us retired clergy to use our theological convictions too, to give constructive critique. Many clergy are hard of hearing constructive critique, especially the older they get.
Well, Wayne, it's an invitation worthy of consideration for all of us who are retired and all who are continuing in active ministry. Wayne Hilliker, thank you so very much.
It's really good to be here, and I'm looking forward to others that are going to be interviewed and hearing what they have to say.